Most generals rely on sight to win battles. Jan Žižka, on the other hand, considered that optional. That's right, this man lost both of his eyes in fighting, yet he never lost a battle. Meanwhile, most medieval commanders with full vision were out there leading their armies into tactical disasters on a weekly basis. Žižka didn't just fight, he turned farmers into an elite force, invented medieval tanks, and consistently humiliated some of the most powerful armies of his time. And yet, despite all that, most people barely know his name. So today, we are diving into the story of the one-eyed warrior who fought blind and still won every single time. Our tale begins in a deeply troubled time. The Catholic Church, in all its infinite wisdom, had split in two, because apparently one pope just wasn't chaotic enough, and because medieval politics never does things halfway, they eventually made it three. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. This might not come as a surprise, but in Bohemia, people weren't exactly thrilled with the state of the church, especially a certain preacher named Jan Hus. Hus had this idea that maybe, just maybe, the Bible should be read by ordinary people instead of just clergy. The church, being the reasonable institution that it was, decided to burn him alive in 1415. Naturally, this went down about as well as you'd expect. The Bohemians, especially Hus's followers, the Hussites, were furious. Meanwhile, King Wenceslas IV of Bohemia, a ruler with all the spine of a wet noodle, did little to control the chaos. His death in 1419 only made things worse, because his successor, Sigismund of Luxembourg, who was also happened to be his half-brother, had all the diplomatic finesse of a brick. Now, to truly appreciate the medieval mess unfolding here, let's rewind a few decades. You see, before everything went to hell, the Kingdom of Bohemia, the Holy Roman Empire, and a bunch of other European territories were united under Emperor Charles IV. And as history tends to go when things are united under one banner, it usually means someone is about to die, preferably of something dramatic yet unimpressive. Like pneumonia. Sure enough, Charles kicked the bucket in 1378, and his vast holdings were divided between his sons. Wenceslas inherited Bohemia, while Sigismund became the king of the Romans, which, despite sounding impressive, was just a fancier way of saying king of Germany. Sigismund later married the Queen of Hungary, adding that kingdom to his collection, and he was later elected to be the Holy Roman Emperor too. The point is, even before he took Bohemia after his brother's death, Sigismund was already a man with a lot of real estate, and as we are about to see, terrible decision-making skills. But before that, let's see what our protagonist is up to. We don't know much about his youth, but we do know that at some point he became a soldier. And by became a soldier, I mean he got into a lot of fights. He served different lords, fought for various causes, and somewhere along the way, lost an eye in battle. Because why have an extra eye when you can cosplay Big Boss and Hannibal? Now, for most people, losing an eye would be a massive setback, but not for Žižka. Instead of seeing this as a sign to maybe retire and take up something less dangerous, like farming, he doubled down and kept fighting. Around this time, Žižka became the chamberlain to Queen Sofia of Bavaria, the wife of Wenceslas. It is said that while serving in her court, he crossed paths with Jan Hus when the queen attended his sermons, a meeting that planted the seeds for Žižka's future in the Hussite movement. Now that we've met our key players, let's dive headfirst into the glorious disaster that was the Hussite Wars, just like they did. Like any good old-fashioned religious war in Europe, this one kicked off with a classic defenestration. Now, if you don't have a dictionary handy, that's just a fancy way of saying someone got yeeted out of a window. The story goes that a group of Hussites, including none other than Jan Žižka, marched into Prague's town hall, led by their priest, demanding the release of some Hussites. The councillors, being uncooperative, declined. So, in the spirit of firm negotiations, they were promptly introduced to the concept of gravity. Ever wondered how Wenceslas died? Yup, having a heart attack when the news of the defenestration reached him. As mentioned, with Wenceslas' death in 1419, the tension in Bohemia got past the boiling point. The Hussites, furious over years of persecution, decided they had enough. The Pope, ever the problem solver, responded with the classic medieval conflict resolution method, declaring a crusade. And guess who was first in line to sign up? Yep, Sigismund. The new king of Bohemia was about to go medieval on his own people. Now, as a side note, this wasn't his first try. Back in 1396, he led a crusade against the Ottomans that ended in a spectacular disaster. The man had a deep passion for crusading, just not the talent for winning them. Unlike Sigismund, however, Žižka was born to win. There was a problem though. The Hussites didn't have much of an army. They were mostly peasants and townsfolk. Not exactly your usual elite fighting force. But Žižka looked at this ragtag militia and saw an opportunity. If life gave him farmers, he'd make them grim reapers. The first real engagement of the war was the Battle of Sodomir. After a Hussite force of 400 men, women, and children found themselves cornered by 2,000 Hospitaller and Imperial Knights, things were looking grim. Realizing they were massively outnumbered, their commander, Berenikov Shivov, ordered his men to raise the white flag. Because sometimes discretion is the better part of valor. But the Catholic Knights, being the reasonable gentlemen they were, decided surrender wasn't on the menu. And just like that, negotiations ended, and the real battle began. However, the Hussites weren't as doomed as they seemed. They had a secret weapon, the war wagon. Picture this. You're a heavily armored knight, expecting the usual medieval battlefield experience. Thundering across an open field, swinging your sword, and being generally terrifying. Instead, you charge headfirst into a barricade of reinforced wagons and immediately get showered with crossbow bolts and gunfire from a bunch of peasants holed up inside what is essentially a death trap. War wagons were the medieval equivalent of tanks, massive wooden carts reinforced with iron plating, strategically arranged to form a moving fortress. Inside, soldiers armed with crossbows, early firearms, and a spear could rain death on any unfortunate soul who got too close. This setup allowed even untrained fighters to hold their own against elite knights. Back to the battle, where amidst the chaos, the Hussite commander was killed, and leadership fell to none other than Žižka. Wasting no time, he took command, organized his troops behind the war wagons, and proceeded to repel wave after wave of charging knights, turning what should have been a massacre into a tactical masterpiece. But Sodomir was just Žižka's warm-up round. The Crusaders haven't even unlocked the full extent of their suffering yet. Sigismund, ever the enthusiastic for losing battles, personally led his armies into yet another disaster against Žižka. In July of 1420, he decided that storming a well-fortified hill with 1,000 of men was a brilliant idea. Žižka, on the other hand, had only 80 soldiers defending Vitkov Hill. In numbers so small it sounds more like a tavern gathering than a defensive force. But this was Žižka we are talking about. Instead of panicking, he turned the hill into a medieval nightmare. His men rained down crossbow bolts, gunfire, and sheer audacity on the incoming Crusaders. The narrow terrain funneled Sigismund troops into a brutal kill zone, and before they knew what hit them, they were either dead, retreating, or experiencing a crisis of faith. And just like that, Žižka pulled off one of the most ridiculous upsets in military history, turning 80 men into an immovable wall and leaving Sigismund with yet another reason to rethink his life choices. Battle after battle, the Holy Roman Empire sent in their knights, and battle after battle, Žižka's war wagons shredded them. He was essentially fighting the 15th century cavalry chargers with a 20th century mindset. The only thing these German knights conquered was the dirt when they fell off their horses. Now, at some point Žižka lost his other eye, and in a move that should have been physically impossible, he kept commanding battles, while completely blind. Take the Battle of Kutna Hora in 1421. The Holy Roman Empire thought they finally had him cornered. Big mistake. Despite being blind, Žižka pulled off a brilliant counterattack that crushed them. Imagine being an Imperial Knight riding confidently into battle, only to be outsmarted by a general who literally couldn't see you. Now seeing all this carnage, God apparently decided Žižka needed a new difficulty setting. So he threw in a civil war for good measures. Yep, because fighting off Crusaders wasn't challenging enough, the Hussites went ahead and split into two factions in 1423. On one side you had the Taborites, Žižka's crew of hardcore reformers. On the other, the more moderate Hussites of Prague. who somehow thought teaming up with the same Catholic nobility that had been trying to kill them was a good idea. Žižka didn't waste time dealing with the so-called moderate faction. At the Battle of Malashov, he absolutely steamrolled them, proving once again that compromise wasn't in his vocabulary. With that settled, the Hussites, now fully rallying behind Žižka, set their sights on crushing Sigismund's supporters in Moravia. However, Žižka died on 11th of October 1424. In the midst of this campaign, did he finally meet his match on the battlefield? Nope. He died of the plague, because it turns out even he couldn't fight the germs. His men called themselves the orphans, as if they had lost their father, and Žižka had one last request from them, that his skin be turned into a drum so his army could keep marching with him even after death. Most people leave behind wheels. Žižka left behind the battle soundtrack. His tactics influenced warfare for centuries. His use of mobile fortifications, firearms and infantry-based tactics foreshadowed modern warfare, and his undefeated record still stands. However, the disastrous war between the Hussites and Catholics continued for another decade after Žižka's death. Let me know if you guys want me to do a video on that part. But to recap, Jan Žižka lost one eye, then lost the other, and still never lost a battle. So next time someone says they can't do something because it's too hard, just remind them that Žižka conquered armies without even seeing them. If you enjoyed this, you might wanna check out this video on Belisarius. He was a general as mad as Žižka, believe me. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more historical insanity. Until the next time.